Hello, everyone. Listen, this is a real treat tonight. I am so excited. I had the pleasure of speaking with none other, an author, a professor, an anti-racist activist, a historian on race, New York Times bestseller. I don't have all of his resume in front of me, but Dr. Ibram X. Kendi is with us tonight, and we're going to be talking about his new release, Magnolia Flower, that just released yesterday. So we are like privileged to get an author to talk to us the day after a release. That is incredible. How are you, sir?
Oh, I'm well. I'm so, I'm just feel really fortunate that this book is out there in the world. It's so meaningful to me, and I'm so fortunate we're able to talk about it tonight.
Yes, and we're fortunate to have you because, we've seen you on CBS this morning. We've seen you with Stephen Colbert. And, listen, the love and support that you are giving to the small businesses, particularly the Black-owned bookstores such as More Books, we are grateful, humbled, appreciative, all of those adjectives and appropriate words that we can use tonight about how we feel about you being here. That's how we feel. So we're going to get right into the meat and potatoes. We hope everybody is enjoying what they're reading thus far from Magnolia Flower. We appreciate everybody buying Magnolia Flower. We're going to make this another triple bestseller if we can, because this is very important. I don't even know if that's a such thing, but that's what we're going to do. But I know, but I live in that life where things just happen because, I make them happen, or I make believe they happen, but none other than that.
You're rehearsing to me.
And now you will eventually understand by the end of this conversation how intricate of a role she played in my life. And now to see someone coming in my age group and spreading that through a generation behind us is just incredible. So we're going to just start with that. Tell us why you decided to do this book. Like, what was the premise? What were you thinking? Why now? Like, just spill it to us. Magnolia Flower.
So I think that there's sort of a reason for why I wanted to adapt Zora's literature for children, and then there's a very specific reason why this book, Magnolia Flower. And I think that the broader reason is that I've just long admired the work of Zora Neale Hurston, the stories that she wrote, the novels, of course, the folklore that she collected. And I think the thing that I most admired about Zora is the ways in which she was willing to share the lives and, of just everyday Black people, particularly rural Southern Black people. And at the time, she was sharing their stories with grace and sharing their stories as if there's nothing wrong with them. Many people thought that there was something wrong with Southern folks, with Black folks, with rural folks, especially rural Southern Black folks. And as anyone sort of knows my work, and particularly, being anti-racist is recognized, there's nothing wrong with any group of people. And so I just always admired the way her literature spoke to that, the way her literature sung that. And I think specifically with Magnolia Flower, when I sort of heard the story, I think it was the second time, but this time I was listening to it on an audiobook, and I was really sort of closely sort of listening to it. I had also been reading quite a bit of picture books to my daughter because it was the beginning of the pandemic. Schools were closed. Like other parents of young kids, we were trying to figure out a way to make it work. And there was something about that story. I was like, whoa, this would just be an incredible story if it was adapted for children. And I think specifically the way it opens and closes with this mighty river in conversation with this dancing brook, and just the imagery of that, I suspected could potentially be attractive to children.
Absolutely. Kids love colors. And big kudos to Love is Wise for the illustrations. Amazing, amazing. You said something that was it stuck out in my mind when you said the description of Southern and the Southern Black people. And that kind of struck me. And I've heard you mention that before because that's where I am. And the stigma from the older generations, some of them aren't forgiving. And so even though we go over time after time and you're doing an amazing job on speaking on racism and speaking on how we should be against it for the teacher. And I see that we have an elementary teacher on. For the teacher, how do they decipher between reality, and that's where we are, and teaching your book or talking about your book? How, because it's amazing, and you have brought your daughter into it, and we're bringing our children into this culture of understanding where we are, even though time has changed and we're a long way from slavery, but just certain dynamics. How does a teacher implement your book into her classroom or into her conversations?
Well, I think particularly with Magnolia Flower, I just think it's important for children, just as it is for adults, to have just a multi-layered book. And I think that the beauty about Magnolia Flower is there's so many different things that you can actually end up teaching children. And so whether you want to teach them, about like the relationship between a river and a brook in the natural world, right? Whether you want to teach them about, there's an element, of course, of the book that deals with slavery. There's another element of the book that deals with Native Americans being forced off their land. And, Magnolia Flower was an Afro-Indigenous girl. Her father was used to be enslaved, and her mother fled the Trail of Tears. Or even Afro-Indigenous people, or even rural people, or even Maroons. Magnolia Flower was born into a Maroon community. These were communities in which people fled slavery, and they went to the mountains or to the swamps or to like remote areas where enslavers couldn't catch them, and they created their own communities, their own free communities. Or if you want to teach about the essence of the book, which is about love and about Magnolia Flower not allowing her father to prevent her from being in love with John, and then them having to sort of flee in order to ensure that they were able to sort of stay together, and just how people fight for love. So I just think it's so many different places for children to ask questions. And as a teacher, of course, an educator can be prepared to answer some of those questions.
What kind of questions are your daughter? Well, your daughter, I know this is the second time you came to her with a children's book on this level, because, I heard that she did the audio book for your Goodnight Racism. So what kind of questions does she have now about Magnolia Flower?
So she's been away, and she recently got back home in Boston. And so we read her the book. Actually, my wife, my partner, had the pleasure of reading her the book first. And so I read her the book second, and she is just so captivated by the illustrations that Love is Wise did. And so she's asking, like, how did they do this? Like, how was she able to just create so much beauty? And the colors and the imagery. I think I released a video of her sort of going through the book, because she just wanted to show off all of the beautiful illustrations. So right now, her questions are about really the pictures. And so I suspect the fourth or fifth or sixth or seventh time, we read the book, she's going to probably start asking questions about slavery and about maroons and about love, which of course I'll hopefully be ready to talk to her about.
And you know, and I think it's an innocence to that. I always feel like no one's born a racist. You know, these things are taught. So I appreciate you shifting the narrative and teaching on the things that are happening, but bringing some light to them so that we have full understanding, regardless. Because with this book, it's not just a Black book, or it's not just a book for African Americans to pick up and read. It's for everybody. We can all take a page out of this book, even as an adult, because you spoke on some topics that as adults, we need to learn how to love. We need to learn how to be forgiving. We need to understand that there are differences, and we need to be able to coexist without creating a prejudice or a bias because we're different. So that starts at a child's age, and the children grow up and they appreciate the differences. And then when they become our age, we realize the differences, and that's where the issues come in. So even in the adult, the parent, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, and I was just
go ahead. You were going to say something?
Well, let me let you finish.
No. So I was just saying, the adult, the parent that's reading this is taking a step back and reevaluating their values, reevaluating what they have been taught. Because even as African Americans, some things that we've been taught aren't absolutely correct. It stemmed from a place in time where that was a feeling, and it bled over into generations. And so even with our other ethnicities, we can read this book and fully understand that it's okay to be different, but we also have to respect our differences. That's what I was going to lead to. The parents that's reading this, they're getting a reality check as well. Even for it to be a children's book, it carries a lot of themes and imagery and everything.
Well, and as a, you know, my daughter's 6 years old now, and so I've read quite a few board books and picture books in my day, and I've learned things from you know, children's books, you know, as well. I mean, that's the beauty of books, whether it's for children or adults. You know, we're all able to learn something. And I also think that particularly I can certainly understand how some educators or parents are concerned about teaching their children about painful episodes in American history. And there are few more painful episodes in American history than slavery and even, you know, settler colonialism. And I think that, but I also think that, and one of the reasons I'm excited about Magnolia Flower in particular is because there are different entryways into those subjects. You know, you can actually have an entryway into the subject that says, you know, there were people during the enslavement era who fell in love, right? So the entryway could be a love story,
right?
You know, Magnolia Flower, and you know, a truly joyous love story where people feel, you know, and children will feel like really sort of good and touched at the end, but then they'll have some questions, right? And they'll, you know, so, and that those questions could, of course, be about some of the more uncomfortable things, but that uncomfortable aspect will be balanced by the joy of the love story. And so that's one of the things I'm hoping with Magnolia Flower, that it can be an entryway, you know, for children into some of these more difficult, you know, topics.
And that's very important. You know, I love themes and stuff. When I was in AP English, we always talk about what was the theme of that. And so it's bigger than what we're thinking. An underlining theme could be love, and it could be teaching love on a different level. So, you know, it's more than 1,000 ways to explain love, but we're talking about a 6-year-old, or we're talking about a parent explaining what love is. And outside of a church setting, you're explaining what love is. So I think that is a very awesome way of introducing that theme and that narrative to children as well as adults. But here's my question, because you have written a good many books, and one of my favorites was How to Be an Anti-Racist. because, we know how to teach someone to be a racist, but how do we reverse that? And after reading that and after hearing you share about that on television, it made me think, okay, so why did he write another adult book? We love Magnolia Flower, but what transition, what happened that he decided, and I'm not going to make another, and I don't want to say adult book because these are books, but our age, what made you decide I'm going to pause on the adults and I'm going to focus on the children? Was it your daughter?
Well, first, I mean, no offense to us adults, but it's a little bit more fun hanging out with the kids. No, I'm just no. I think part of it was that certainly my daughter and I having a child and not necessarily feeling as if I had produced literature that she could read, or I had even produced a book like How to Raise an Anti-Racist that could give me a better understanding of how I could nurture her to be anti-racist, to recognize racial equality. I felt it would allow me to be a better father and a better person. And so I think certainly part of it was my daughter. The other part of it was recognizing that this is, what people were looking for. I can still remember, like when I wrote Stand from the Beginning and even How to Be an Anti-Racist, one of the most consistent responses that people had was, I wish I learned about this when I was in school. I wish I would have learned about this when I was in high school, when I was in middle school. I'm 80 years old or 50 years old or 30 years old. And like, why am I learning about this history? Or why am I learning about what it means to be anti-racist now? Like, and part of that, what I heard from that was a frustration, because when you've been thinking a particular way for 40 years, it's very hard to change, right? And so part of that, one of the things I was hearing through that was, I wish I learned this like when I was learning a new language, because it's just much easier, right? And so I was like, okay, I want to try to assist others who are providing this ability for us to basically allow kids to learn anti-racist ideas, so they won't come of age and have to unlearn racist ideas as they're learning anti-racist ideas.
Wow. Now, off the record, prior to coming, live, we were sharing in a discussion that you had family members who were from Guyton, Georgia. And how do you explain, or not so much explain, but with the wealth of knowledge that you have and experience, and now you're, I'm assuming, in Boston, Massachusetts, which is, above the Mason-Dixon, as my mom would say, how do you translate your knowledge now to your family of Guyton, Georgia? Because I'm not too far from there, so I know how they feel and how you feel are two different things. And you made me think about that when you said, I wish someone would have told me this in high school. I wish someone would have told me this when I was younger. And I'm just thinking about your family in Guyton, Georgia. What is that experience for them, for you coming back now with the knowledge that explaining that to them when their life and their culture was completely different?
Well, it's a question that I routinely sit with, and what I mean by that is, though I'm as a scholar, we are trained to write and speak to other scholars,
right?
And it's of course, many people critique scholars because they're like, I don't know what that person's talking about, right? Or I don't know, I can't really, this isn't legible. But I also think it's important for us to just know that scholars are not trained to clarify their expertise in a way that everyday people can understand. So most scholars are not like physicians where they have to be able to explain to a patient, the science of what, let's say, they're facing.
Right.
But that's something that I've taken upon myself, that I want to be able to communicate to everyday people who are just going about their own lives and day, but I can still sit down and explain to them potentially the way racism is operating, in their communities, or what they could potentially do or be, because it's impacting everyday people. And
Right.
and this is a problem that is affecting us all. And I think it's important for those of us who've done all this research, who've engaged in all this study, to be able to share this information with the people, with my family members, and
Right.
and or even people that I don't know.
So let me ask you this. I know that the late Zora Neale Hurston is instrumental in your writing as it relates to Magnolia Flower, but do you have other late and great or current authors that you pen notes from as that goes into explaining your message? So you hear something from something, or you've read something and you say, I'm going to pin that because I'm eventually going to come back to something like that, as you did with Zora Neale Hurston.
So I would probably say, some of the others, scholars, particularly those who are no longer with us, and writers, I would say W.E.B. Du Bois, who is most known for his book, The Souls of Black Folk, but he wrote a whole host of other books. And he, going back to what I was just talking about, like, he ended up leaving higher ed and starting The Crisis, which was a magazine, so he can talk to everyday people, through his work. And so, certainly W.B. Du Bois is someone who, a writer that I admire for that reason.
Awesome. So do you see yourself, I'm looking at the girl dad, you're talking about your daughter, that's very powerful. Do you see the two of you collaborating on a project? I know all of these projects are hers, but just as she grows and matures with the conversation that she's hearing from both you and her mom and everybody around her, and just learning about who she is as a young lady, as an African-American woman, do you see a adolescent level of writing as it relates to her? Because this seems to be your theme is love. It seems to be this is your love language with your daughter. You are leaving that legacy and that footprint to her. So do you see, as time goes by, that maybe you guys are co-authoring something? Or,
so
I know it's hard to say, she's 6. No pressure. Please, Mom, no pressure.
I actually do not see us co-writing something, and it's largely because I don't think she would allow me. Like, I think she's like, Dad, I can do it myself. I don't need you. You can edit it, but no. It's gonna be Imani Kendi, and I don't need you on my book. Yeah, because she is. She has that type of personality, so she wants to create, herself, and she, I think, has a very keen sense of what she wants, and that's something, of course, we're trying to nurture, in her, particularly, as a girl, we want her to believe that she can do and create, anything that anyone else can do, and she doesn't need her father, even if I've done all of this to do a book with. But if she somehow, some way, allows me to be a part of a project with her, I would love to do that.
Oh, I think would. I can, she was very passionate on doing the voiceover. So I could see her taking on your likeness and making it her own. Now that part I can see, but you established a great platform for her, and we can all appreciate that. My father passed away 9 years ago, but I'm definitely a girl dad, and he always adamant about keeping a book in our hand. It didn't matter what the book was, just keep a book in your hand, because he felt like that would avoid a distraction. And so even in what you're doing, it's still keeping her on the straight and narrow. So I would be interested, I'm going to pin that myself, because I would be interested in seeing what this looks like for her in years to come. So I think it's going to be something amazing. She's already going to be famous, so I think she's just going to bleed into that level of writing, because you have a lot to say, and she's going to capture all of that and try to do something with it. So I think that's important.
Yeah, I mean, that would be lovely, and I think for me, it's just supporting her in whatever she decides to do.
That's awesome. And speaking of support, because we won't hold you long, how can we continue to support you? I mean, you're doing all of these things. Of course, we know to pick up Magnolia Flower. That goes without saying. But how can we continue to support you, your movement, what you're doing? What can we do from this end to continue the progression of not only this work, but all of your works?
Well, I think the way to support me is to really figure out a way to support those efforts in your local community towards racial justice, and figure out ways to support those organizations or even those leaders who are trying to create more equity and justice in your county, in your city, in your town. And that's all I'm ever encouraging people to do and be. And that's, and that's all my books are pointing people towards,
Right.
is to really activate themselves, because it's going to take us, and it's going to take every single one of us to construct a new type of society, where we are truly equitable in terms of our sort of policies, where people view different people and respect different people, as you stated earlier, equally, where people don't have to fear being in their body, where people don't have to be disadvantaged or even privileged based on their identity. I mean, this is the type of society where we're trying to build, and every single one of us has to be a part of that solution.
Absolutely. And we're definitely going to do our part, starting with the Magnolia Flower. We did have someone who mentioned that she's an elementary school teacher, and she's ready to share your book with her multilingual students. And she's out of Salem, Massachusetts. How about that? How about that? Someone asked about a podcast. Is that something you see on the horizons, or are they wishing you to do this?
So I actually did a podcast called Be Anti-Racist.
Okay.
Last year. And yeah, I mean, I think it was a great experience. Podcasts are no joke. I mean,
right.
For those of you who listen to podcasts, it's really difficult, right, to put together one. And so I really enjoyed that experience.
It can be difficult. I dabbled in podcasting, when it first came out, and it was like a rush. Everybody was like, I want to podcast and this, that, and other. But it's actually harder to come up with content for a podcast than it is to just hold a conversation. And you go into it thinking, I'm just going to be myself. I'm just going to hold a conversation. And as soon as you see the red light on that you're live, it's like, wait, What was I going? I knew what I was going to say before the button came on. So it is a lot of pressure. And again, with the society that we live in, you're trying to have that fine line of gray area where you're not crossing so much into the Black and not crossing so much into the white. But then when you take a pause, you're really trying to figure out, did I say everything that needed to be said? It's not really about hurting anyone's feelings. It's about owning the truth. And that's one of the things that I could appreciate in hearing you speak, is that you don't walk away worrying about the likes or the follow through or who's going to get me, or should I change this up or should I say that? You always walk away knowing that you have said truth. And so people adapt to the truth, and they respect you for the consistency, because all of your work has that underlying tone of, I need action and I'm going to write it. And you guys are going to, it's almost like a pioneer and a settler when I read your work. The pioneer, you come in, you clear the land, you put the stake in the ground, but then you're on to something else. And then the settlers come through, and with settlers in this case being the readers, we come through, we pick up your work, and now it's a charge. We close your book and we're like, I got to do something. I don't know what I got to do. I need to go get a poster, a marker, a t-shirt or something. And so we can appreciate that, because now we need to learn how to use our voices for good. We need to learn how to use our protesting for good. We need to learn how to use our platforms and our education for good. And so we can't just have these conversations like we're having and read the work that you're putting out and not apply any action. So that's a charge to everyone who's watching tonight. We have work to do. What would you say to that charge?
Well, part of it, I think, for me is I'm described in many ways, but I just sort of self-identify myself as someone who produces public scholarship. And what that means to me is, I produce scholarship that can affect and improve the lives of the public. And so It's not produced for any sort of other reason. And I personally am not interested in being a public intellectual if the only thing about a public intellectual is that they're just known by the public. I'm really interested in creating scholarship, or even children's books, that can be useful, to the public, that can influence the public, that can allow the public to transform its lives, their lives for the better. And so that's sort of my North Star. And I think that's why that's my focus. And I think that focus then leads to wanting to share the sort of truth based on the research with people, and also believing that if you share that truth with people, people will know how to use it.
Absolutely. Adele Proch said that the child will lead us to what they want to learn. Beautiful example about your daughter's curiosity towards the pictures in the book. And that is exceptional. I am still on that, because I think that we have to gain the interest of children, and we shape that narrative of what they're going to learn ongoing and how they're going to learn it. Someone did have a question for you. They wanted to know, what would you say to parents and communities where books are being challenged or banned in schools?
Well, first, I would say that I think it's important for people in those communities who resist or are against those books being banned to figure out ways to organize themselves, to either gain the ability to stop those bans, or organize themselves so that those books that are being banned in the public library, there's another place where students or people have access to those books. Those books that are being banned here, there's access over here in that same community for those books. And so I just think it's a time for people to organize themselves so that that knowledge, so that that literature is not lost. And I think in different communities, you know, you may have the ability to basically take over the school board to stop all this book banning. In other communities, you may not feel that you have that ability, but you have the ability to, you know, to organize in other ways to ensure that the literature is available, to defend teachers who are doing the courageous work of their jobs. And so I just think that that's important. I also just want to ensure that everyone understands that this isn't new.
Right.
So in Georgia, as an example, since, you know, we're virtually in Georgia right now,
Yes.
100 years ago, you know, books by people like W.B. Du Bois, who I mentioned earlier, or even Carter G. Woodson, who's the father of Black history, those books weren't available in schools and in many public libraries. They were pretty much banned. Or even in 1820, books by abolitionists were pretty much banned. In let's say Georgia as an example. And so there has long been a history of people who wanting to conserve racism, banning books that undermine that conservation. And so this is just the latest iteration of that. And so we, of course, have to organize against that, like our ancestors have organized against it.
Wow. Adele said she's going to open up an anti-racist little free library. I love the little free libraries. We have a ton of them in our neighborhood, and it's actually amazing to see the little kids go up to it and it's, you know, bring a book, take a book. And I wish I had that growing up. You know, there was probably one or two people who had a library card. So when you talk about being exposed, and a few minutes ago when you said something, creating their own entity of doing things, my dad, and it's not correct grammar, so please forgive me, but he would always say, not having is no excuse for not getting. And so when you were talking about the lack of access, but still having access, so you can't get it in this place, but you can come together and we can either split a book or we can rotate the book or something like that. It's no excuse in this day and age not to have access, because access is everywhere. You know, eventually, are you thinking about turning this into an ebook or an audio book? Maybe.
So Magnolia Flower is available as an audiobook. And
nice. I'll mention that to my son because everything is audio for him. He does not.
Well, I listen to a lot of audiobooks, so I can't even. But one thing I'll mention that even Adele stated about the curiosity is that I think it's important for us, particularly with younger children, but even, you know, high school age and middle school children, for us to create an environment where they can become curious about a topic that we want to talk to them about. You know, because kids are so quick to tune us out if they feel like we're lecturing to them, we're talking to them about something they don't want to know. But when a child asks the question, like, there's nothing more beautiful than that. And so how do we offer them books that at some point they'll ask questions? And I think in the case of my daughter, with different books, the third or fourth time, she'll start asking different questions. And I typically am patient and I just wait for those questions to come. And sometimes I may not even know the answer. You know, we read her a whole bunch of different types of books, you know, books about, you know, Muslim kids, books about kids who are immigrants, books about, you know, kids who are in love, books about kids with turtles. I mean, all different types of books, right? And sometimes I don't know the answer. And so that also gives me the ability to be like, okay, let's figure it out, right? Let's, you know, plan to go to the library this weekend, or let's plan to look on the internet, you know, tomorrow when you get home from school. And so as a researcher, I love simulating research, with Imani.
And that's good because that builds the interest. And, I guess it's kind of hard if you have an older child. So you made mention of having those conversations to build a curiosity, but your daughter is 6. So if I had a child that was 14 and I'm trying to explain to them the things that are happening in the world outside of social media, outside of the internet, how do I gain the curiosity at that age? Or is it too late? Do I just need to hang it up?
So let me give an example. With a 14-year-old, there probably has to be more negotiation. And so let's say if your 14-year-old asks you to do something, right? That, they have to ask you about it because they know that it's not necessarily something you want to do. Like, oh, mom, can you take me here? Okay, I've already taken you there. And so let's say if you say, okay, you know what? If I take you there, I want you to come with me to this place that I'm going to Saturday morning.
Okay.
And then that place you're going to Saturday morning is you're volunteering at a homeless shelter.
Right.
And what you're hoping is that they come with you and they see that, let's say, at the homeless shelter, people are disproportionately Black.
Mm-hmm.
Or that there's a number of people here. And so the hope is that while you're there and they're helping you they're helping you, and you're volunteering, that they'll ask questions. They may not ask questions while they're there. They may ask questions on the ride home, or they may wait 2 days to sort of ask questions or to engage in a dialogue. And so I think with older kids, it isn't like you can read them a story, but you can introduce them to an experience that can cause them to become curious. That's
good. That is really good. It may help out in some classrooms as well with teaching the mid-level, high-grade students, because sometimes some teachers feel like it's unreachable at this point, or some parents feel like they're unreachable at this point, but tying it to negotiation, that's the word, negotiation. We'll tie it to negotiation, or as the kids say now these days, tit for tat. We're going to tie it to that. And hopefully that bleeds into more conversations that we're having about everyday issues that sometimes we're afraid to talk about. And I would always hear a good friend of mine say, we have to talk about the hard things while it's easy. So we don't want to get into any more situations like George Floyd or any other situation like that. We want to be able to talk about these things, even in the book like Magnolia Flower, to a 6-year-old or to a junior level child. We want to be able to talk about these things now while it's easy, it's fun, the colors are drawing, we're getting the momentum and we're getting the attention, but we're also getting the message. So if I can't appreciate you for anything else, I can appreciate you for bringing such a broad, huge narrative down to the mind of a child. That's impressive. It's incredible, and it's much needed. So I really appreciate you for that.
And I think I would say part of it for me is I just have a tremendous amount of respect for the minds of children. Mm-hmm. And so for me, like, and even working with Love Is Wise, who they illustrated Magnolia Flower. I just thought from the illustrations to the language, if you're presenting this to young people, it better be top notch. And
right.
So part of it is just having that level of respect, right?
Yeah.
For young people, and knowing that if it is top notch, they'll grab it off the shelf and and read it and appreciate it or listen to it. And then also, the other thing I think with kids and even older kids, since we were just talking about, mm-hmm. I always think about just the sort of analogy of seeds, and right. Just constantly planting seed after seed after seed after seed, and And, you know, at some point those seeds are going to grow into curiosity.
Mhm. That's awesome. I really appreciate you. I thank you for doing this with us, for supporting small businesses, for sharing, for talking about it. I'm wishing you nothing but success on this book. I love the details. So Love is Wise. Kudos to you. I love the details, the colors, everything, but most importantly, the message. And also paying homage to Zora Neale Hurston is just, perfect. Perfect, which would have made it more perfect if it came out in February, but we're not holding that to you.
Well, it'll be ready. It'll be around in February.
Yes, it sure will. It sure will. And we can continue this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Again, we're going to continue to support you in everything that you're doing and your messages. And maybe you can, do a hashtag girl dad with, you got the shirt, the theme, the book, that might turn into something. You just never know. But we appreciate you for bringing that capacity to us tonight. Everyone is thanking you, and we just hope that we can see more of this. Not that you have to go strictly to children's books, but thank you. We're in a back to school mode, and this is the perfect time to hone in on this message for our children.
Of course. Well, I just want to thank you for all the work you do getting these books out there to the people. I mean, for me, as a book person, there's few things that better represent sort of treasures to me.
Yes.
Than books, and which is partly why knowing that these treasures are being banned in certain places is devastating, to me, because it's a treasure that everyone can have.
Yes.
And it's a treasure that's accessible to everyone, whether, they go to the library and get it for free, or they're able to sort of purchase it. And so for me, those people like you who are giving people access to these treasures is, I just want to thank you for all you do.
Thank you. And now that I know that you have some family down in Guyton, it's truly an honor and a privilege. It's almost like family. We're all just one family. You just never know. My mom always told me, you just never know who knows who. I would have never guessed that in a million years. But, that's honorable. We appreciate you. If there's anything that I can do personally, or Mr. Moore from More Books can do for you, we welcome it. We're going to support. We're going to push this until we can't push it anymore, until you hold up a stop sign and say, listen, we're sold out. Until HarperCollins says, tell her to stop talking about it, and then we'll stop talking about it. In the meantime, we thank you for joining us tonight in your message, sharing your space and your knowledge, and I'm very appreciative of it.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good night.
All right. Good night, everyone.